because think about it. It's like turning the tables. What does the RCMP and other law enforcement and national security agencies do? They have been surveilling us since time immemorial, numbering us, trapping us on reserve, assigning numbers to us, and all the law enforcement agencies, even the RCMP, was created to surveil us and keep us subdued. So now you have CSIS, the spy agency, doing that. You have RCMP terrorist units watching us and keeping track of all of our protesters and peaceful marchers. So I thought, you know what? It's about time we turn the tables on them and start looking at what they're doing so Canadians understand just how dangerous it is if we've got RCMP following us all the time. It's not just benign watching to see if you commit crimes. It can actually be dangerous for us.
Welcome to Meet the Onôtinikêwak, a podcast where we sit down with Indigenous people who are making a positive impact in their communities and beyond. From activists and artists to entrepreneurs and community leaders, these warriors share their wisdom, their experience, and their perspectives on a wide range of topics. Today, I'm excited to have an incredible guest on the show, Pam Palmater. Pam is a proud Mi'kmaq woman from El River Bar First Nation, and she's done some truly amazing work in Indigenous advocacy, human rights, and social justice. She's an internationally recognized speaker, a best-selling author, and an award-winning podcaster who uses her platforms to educate and inspire action. Pam, it's great to have you on the podcast today. I've been watching you and following you for a long time and really wanting to get you on here. And as soon as I heard you speak in a couple of videos, like, hey, that's definitely someone I want to get on here, show people what's possible and show that there's people out there fighting for their rights and for all that social justice in the Indigenous world. And yeah, it's just amazing to have you on here. So like I do with everybody, if you can just start with a little bit where you grew up, how you grew up, and that type of thing.
Sure. And first, thanks for having me. I'm super pumped to be on your podcast. I always love meeting fellow Native podcasters. And of course, with warrior in the name, we kind of have an affiliation that way. So thanks so much for having me. Akwe Nindaluizi Pam Palmater. I'm from the sovereign Mi'kmaq Nation in unceded Mi'kma'ki. And for people who don't know where that is, it's effectively we own all of the Maritimes. So Mi'kmaq is all of Nova Scotia, all of PEI, most of New Brunswick, parts of Maine, and parts of Quebec, and some in Newfoundland. So we have a massive territory. And of course, because of colonization, we have been divided up into a whole bunch of different Mi'kmaq First Nations. My First Nation is Ugbaganjig, which is Eel River Bar First Nation, right at the top of New Brunswick, I should say. And I come from a huge family, 8 sisters, 4 brothers, and most of them are older than me, like a lot older. So I was a baby when they were just starting high school. And my father asked them to get involved in Native politics to address all the injustices. So people who like my advocacy, you can just credit my older brothers and sisters. And anyone who's cranky at the things I do or say, that's all on me. Because I wouldn't know anything about politics and advocacy and speaking up and community relations were it not for them and their advocacy. So that's a little bit about me. Oh, I have 2 kids. They're in their 30s. And I have a grandson named River, which is Cebu in Mi'kmaq.
Oh, that's awesome. That's cool that you got such a big family, and I can relate to that too. I was the baby, and I always joke because we grew up on a small farm, so we're all 5 years apart. And I was the baby, so it was like one could take care of the other one while the other one was working, and just kind of work your way up. But it's interesting growing up as, like you say, as a young person when your brothers and sisters are so much older. And my sister, I always equate to almost being like a mom to me. She helped raise me a lot, right? And we have a really close relationship that way. And yeah, you definitely learn a lot from those older siblings. And there wasn't a lot of fighting because there was no fair fights. Like they were just beat me up, right? So it wasn't.
Exactly. And when they're older, like it's effectively for my family, it's like having moms and dads. So there's like pros and cons, right? They tell you what to do. But for the younger ones, those are the ones that you fight with and you don't like and they're annoying and all that other stuff because they're so close in age. But the older ones were more, I better listen to what my brothers and sisters have to say. And in fact, just like you, my older sister Phoebe had her twin boys the same time my mom had me. So in terms of like who's really my brothers and sisters, I effectively grew up with my nephews as my brothers. So it's a huge family and I just love it.
Oh, that's awesome. That's awesome. Well, I'm great. I'm glad to hear it. Where are you situated right now, or like where do you call home now?
So right now I'm in Toronto. So cuz I work at Toronto Metropolitan University, but I was born and raised and worked and raised my kids in Mi'kma'ki. So primarily in New Brunswick, mostly off reserve, and then in Halifax, Nova Scotia, all Mi'kmaq territory, until I came here to Toronto. So most of the time when I'm doing media or podcasts or whatever, it's from Toronto, like where I work, but a lot of my community-based work is like back at home or in different First Nations. So you never know where I'm going to be from time to time, which is why this kind of online stuff is perfect. I could be in, Flying Dust First Nation and still be able to do this.
That's deadly. Did you just throw that out, or did you know that's where I grew up? That's where I'm from, is Meadow Lake. Flying Dust is the reserve in Meadow Lake, but I'm actually a member
No,
of Kennew Lake First Nation. But
I was trying to think of a First Nation on the prairies, and that was the first one that came to my head because I love the name Flying Dust.
oh, that's deadly. Yeah, no. So I grew up in Meadow, and Flying Dust
Nice.
is a reserve right there.
Yeah.
No, that's awesome. And you did mention, so you work at university, so a
Mhm.
person doesn't just get a job like that out of nowhere. Where was some of the backstory in the education, and where you went to school, and where you kind of ended up today, where you're doing it?
Well, I primarily went to school like off reserve. So my mom and dad, by the time they had us and we were really, small, my dad was like 60, 65. So he had had a whole life experience and thought, you know what, let's try to move closer to a city because the education might be better. So we went to school off reserve. I did my, education in Fredericton, New Brunswick. And then I did my Bachelor of Arts at St. Thomas University. It's a small university on the University of New Brunswick campus in Fredericton. And I did a Native Studies degree. Back in the day, they were one of the only universities that ever had that. So I thought, I'm going to learn some stuff. And from there, I went to University of New Brunswick Law School, did my law degree, and then went to Dalhousie University Law School, which is in Nova Scotia, to do my master's in law. And then I did my doctorate in law there. So my kids call me like the queen of nerds. I have spent my entire life like learning. They were growing up and I was sitting at the table while they did their homework and I was working on all of my schoolwork too, and working, of course. But yeah, and during my grad work, interestingly enough, I worked at Justice Canada because I was a lawyer by then. So I worked at Justice Canada primarily providing advice to Indian Affairs on non-litigation issues. So adding lands to reserves, permits and like all these other kinds of things. I did about 10 years hard time at Justice Canada and Indian Affairs, but I tell people, please don't hold it against me because I'm fully rehabilitated and I feel like I learned so much that I can actually contribute. And now I can say I've seen the inside, seen the outside, and so it's a good blend to have.
That's funny that you say that, because I deal a lot now with ISC and Indigenous Service Canada, and I've I'm a bit too empathetic at times. I think it's to a detriment at times, but I do feel for them. As much as they do, as much as there's some bad people, there's some really good people in there trying to do good work. There's
Yes.
just so much bureaucracy that they're tied up in, and so many red tapes that they have to jump through, and
No.
it's tough, right? And it's one of those. It's very much a stepping stone as well for careers, because like within the national programs, right? Of, like you just said, kind of got to go do your hard time in Indigenous services, then it opens the doors to a lot of other
Yeah.
departments, right? And
The
it's
knowledge
usually
is insane. Like at Justice Canada, for example, it was that was the toughest place to work because of all the litigators who were just going hard against First Nations and who hated First Nations and who just considered it like a war. So that was very, very difficult. A little bit different in Indian affairs, but not so much sometimes. But what I learned, you learn their strategies, how they come up with their policies, what ministerial briefings are. I took every bit of training I could. So I took legislative drafting, statutory interpretation, knowing that someday I'm going to be on the outside and all of that is going to be very, very useful information. And so I think it also varies on in the regions too, because notoriously the Atlantic region was always horrible, like horrible. But other regions have had different experiences. So there you go. I mean, you can't lose from gaining the experience. And for me, I had just completed my law degree. And so working there was a full-time job with finally decent pay, because I'd always worked for Native organizations and, those kinds of things. And I could raise my kids because I was a single mom. So I was able to pay the bills, give them food and clothing and sports and music while I was doing my grad work. And so when I was done my grad work, perfect time to transition and come and work at a university. But it allowed me to feed my kids at the same time. And that's so important.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, definitely. I mean, life's stressful enough. Obviously, if you're chasing your doctorate and doing everything with law, like, I mean, that's not easy on top of raising two kids, right? So having some of those stressors relieved, could just imagine how good that would feel. Within the university now, so what are you teaching there now, and where do you offer students some support?
So I am in the Department of Politics and Public Administration because back when I joined about 16 years ago, they didn't have a law school. So they thought, well, the best place for you is in politics because you can still teach law. And they liked the fact that I had practical experience. Like, I actually, not only did I work for Native organizations and First Nations, but also this kind of practical experience inside the government. So I always, when I teach undergrad courses, it's always Indigenous politics, Indigenous governance. That seems to be like the focus. Administration, government is administration, intergovernmental relationships, that kind of thing. And at the grad level, there's a lot more law. So I do have some law for the undergrads in the hopes that it doesn't scare them away. But at the master's level and PhD level, when I teach those grad courses, the focus is it's called Indigenous law and policy in Canada, but it really is laws impacting Indigenous peoples separate from Indigenous laws, which I also teach. And then the policy side of things, because there's federal policy, provincial policy, municipal policy, international policy. So it's really the kinds of students that we teach at the grad level tend to go into public service or for like non-government organizations. So these are the people that I am going to be able to get into their brains and plant seeds. So if they go off and become a policy advisor or a strategic guy or something like that, they will at least have some foundation to remember. You got to talk to us too. You literally can't be the province of Ontario or the federal government and not think that Indigenous issues are part of policy or law.
No, that makes tons of sense. I know there's so much in there, right? And I'm glad that there's people like you out there, at least being able to teach, but teaching from the right place and a good place, right? And trying to, because you're shaping all these people that are they have the biggest effect on us in another 10, 12 years, right? Like they're the ones putting those in place. With some of that being said, and kind of along those same lines, I did see that you did I think you co-authored a report, right, with the RCMP or on the RCMP. What did that kind of look like? What was some of the big takeaways from your perspective on the research you're doing?
Well, so interestingly enough, there's only certain kinds of research that gets funded by, granting institutions. And Then never had much interest in policing or critical looks at law enforcement, especially the RCMP. And because we are disproportionately impacted by the RCMP, some of them live in Northern First Nations, they're the ones who kill us at alarming rates, those kinds of things. I have for years been doing research on the RCMP, regardless of the fact that it wasn't like funded through university. And so I had been doing so much research. And there was other organizations who were caring about the sex discrimination and sexualized violence in law enforcement. So we just kind of joined forces. It's like, great, you've got the sex-based stuff, like gender. I'm working on Indigenous stuff, which also includes sex-based. And we just put all of our information together in contemplation of, so we wanted to have this report out just before the Nova Scotia Mass Casualty Commission started up in Nova Scotia, because you'll probably recall the epic failure of RCMP and all of their bumbling when some dude who was friends with the RCMP went around shooting a whole bunch of people, and they were just literally chasing their tails. So knowing that I might be called as a witness or to make a submission, we made this report. And so that was primarily for them. And the other thing was that we had done some public education with the former Justice of the Supreme Court of Canada, Michel Bastrache, because he had released a separate report which focused on sexualized violence by the RCMP against female RCMP, so inside. And he was just stunned by the numbers of violent rapes that happen against RCMP women. And it's shocking. So when for years we've been saying, this is what the RCMP have been doing to our women and our girls, like, so kids, and people are like, no, that couldn't happen. It's like, well, if they're doing that to women with guns, imagine what they're doing to people who are forced into marginalized positions, knowing that no one cares about them or will believe them. And so I knew it was going to be important for that. Plus, I had already done a chunk for the National Inquiry into Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women and Girls. Like, we kind of partnered and collaborated on submissions, but my chunk was, here's the problem with law enforcement and how they directly contribute as perpetrators or as people who just allow it to happen and don't investigate murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls. So it is my biggest bone to pick, and still doing lots of work on that. Actually, I'm developing a podcast that's going to have a certain set number of episodes that's just on the RCMP and all of the horrible things they do behind the scenes that people don't know. They have no idea just how bad it is in there.
Yeah, well, yeah, there's a lot to unpack just with that. And that was one of my questions, was the new upcoming podcast. So you're going to set that as basically a set series and just have that as more of an information based.
Yeah. So
process?
basically, it's called Criminals on Patrol, because then I could use the acronym COP, which is COP, and I thought that was very clever of me.
Well done.
And it's about, so the idea, presumably, if it goes further, season 1 will be about the RCMP. Season 2 might be about the Winnipeg Police Service. Season 3 might be about Edmonton Police. And season 4 could be about Toronto Police. So there's different things happening in different police forces. I wanted to start with the RCMP because they are just so horrible. And I know I've had friends that have worked in the RCMP, so I know that there's always good people, but I would refer to them as the good apples. You know how they always talk about bad apples? Oh, there's always a few bad apples. Well, instead, the bunch is spoiled, but there's a few good apples who are trying to, be whistleblowers and make changes, but working in a hard system. So yes, I'm very excited about working on this podcast. I'm working on it now. I've conducted a bazillion interviews with experts and former RCMP officers and people who are part of class actions against the RCMP. So it's going to be a good mix of people. So it's not just me talking all the time.
That's not a bad thing. Um, but no, that's awesome. We'll make sure we put some show notes and where people can find you at the end of that, and where they can keep track of where that's going to come up. Just in this past bit, you've been talking about some serious stuff and some serious issues, and a lot of your writing is obviously part of that, right? Like you're writing
Mhm.
about some important subjects. Is there, where did that come from? Like where did that, I don't know, I don't want to say inspiration, but like where did that writing come from? Or was it just built out of necessity that
Mm.
you need to get this information out there?
It was more like as I was growing up, like as a little girl, my older siblings took me to community meetings, information sessions, protests, rallies, marches, and every single conversation around the dinner table was here's what's happening, some kind of injustice. Here's what we should do about it. We would debate it amongst ourselves. So I grew up with that constantly in my ear of they're not respecting treaty rights, land rights, they're abusing us, they're incarcerating us, all of that other stuff. So I kind of grew up in that world of we need to know about this. But it was actually my time at Justice Canada and a little bit before, bad experiences. If you're a Native person and you live on the res, it's not uncommon to be harassed by the RCMP on a regular basis. So lots of bad experiences there. But when I went to go work at Justice Canada and I had to work sometimes with the RCMP, I was stunned at how much that they would share and divulge and just be so overtly racist and hateful about Native people in front of me. I was like, maybe you don't know I'm Native? I'm not, I guess my skin is a little bit lighter, so that's why. But I thought, oh, when I get out of this place, I am going to just go hard at law enforcement. Because think about it, it's like turning the tables. What does the RCMP and other law enforcement and national security agencies do? They have been surveilling us since time immemorial, numbering us, trapping us on reserve, assigning numbers to us, and all the law enforcement agencies, even the RCMP, was created to surveil us and keep us subdued. So now you have CSIS, the spy agency, doing that. You have RCMP terrorist units watching us and keeping track of all of our protesters and peaceful marchers. So I thought, you know what? It's about time we turn the tables on them and start looking at what they're doing so Canadians understand just how dangerous it is if we've got RCMP following us all the time. It's not just benign watching to see if you commit crimes. It can actually be dangerous for us.
Wow. No, there's so much there. Hey, um, yeah, you're amazing. You got so much on the go with stuff that's maybe off the beaten path a little bit that you can't get out there to people, right? Like what, I believe your assistant Jeremy was talking about it. Like, do you have an avenue of, is it a blog that you have going on? Is it I can't remember what
Um,
it's called.
I I basically was trained in social media by my two boys. So, like, trained in computers and IT and social media. So every time there was a new social media like platform that came out, Facebook, it's like, okay, mom, we're setting up an account. Here's what you use Facebook for. Use it for this. Don't use it for this. So then more would come on, LinkedIn and Twitter and all that other stuff, and they would tell me, here's how you engage on that platform. It's not just one post and you just blast it everywhere. So there were the ones who said, it was actually my kids, believe it or not, who said, Mom, you're going around the country, you're trying to educate First Nations, you're trying to educate smaller communities, smaller segments of society, unions, teachers. You're going to have much bigger of an educational platform and a rallying the troops platform if you also do that on social media, if you effectively meet people where they are. Because you know how people always say, oh, education's a new buffalo and education is going to save us. And I'm a proponent of education, but how many people actually go to university? How many people are going to take courses that talk about these things? Not all of us have the opportunity to do that. And think about all the older people. They've already lived their lives. They're not going to come back. So I think it's very limiting to think that by teaching some students in a class, or at least in my class, that that's going to have a significant impact. So they said, go to where people are. And this age category and group is on Facebook, and this professional category is on LinkedIn, and the cranky political people are on Twitter, and the activists are here. And so that's what I decided to do. Just blast away everywhere I possibly can and create content on different platforms in the hopes that I'm reaching people where they are, right? Because the people that are on YouTube watching my videos are not necessarily podcast listeners, and vice versa. People who are just hardcore into podcasts and listen to them on the way to work or in the gym, they might not be YouTube watchers. So I have to figure out how to do this. I have a blog. It used to be called Indigenous Nationhood. It's now called the Warrior Life blog. But I also have a Substack that I just created, and I'm on Medium. So for the written stuff, you can find that, access that anywhere. And my website, which is just so cleverly named PamPalmater.com, is kind of like the hub where everything is. So you can go to that website and say, well, I'm into YouTubes, and just watch YouTubes. Or I'm into podcasts, Or I'm into blogs, here's my blogs. Or I'm into academic publications, here it is. There's even something for kids, because I have a Warrior Kids podcast, which is award-winning, shocking to me. But I get to engage with kids and make sure that we're raising a whole generation of social justice activists and people who care about people and the planet. So that is my passion. I would do that full time. So if I ever win $1 million, that's my plan. Just engaging in the public.
That's where we'll find you. Funny enough, that's where I was like, when I came up with the name for this podcast, I had to shift gears and make it Cree because you're out there. But then I found you and I seen it and I was like, oh, deadly. Then there's Warrior of Kids and I was like, oh, this is really good. So got my son listening to that, and it was pretty awesome. And then just having you out there doing these things. But when you go back, when you were talking about social media and different things, and I know thank God I kind of lived in both those worlds where I got to grow up without and then with.
Yeah.
And bullying when I was like, it was just, you get punched in the face and then that was it, right? And it was a fight and dust up. But now you can't run away from it. It's online. And when you were talking, you're not talking about a lot of like rainbows and butterflies. I always say that, but there's some hard hitting stuff, and you're going to have people on both sides of the fence. How do you personally, do you stay out of that comment section like Joe Rogan talks about, or are you in there? That could just tear a person apart. One comment,
could.
right? So
yeah, and if you're a caring person, so if you have a big ego or you're narcissistic, none of that would bother you. I have always cared. I grew up a very, very shy little girl, kind of insecure. I didn't really know where I fit. So if anyone thought anything bad of me, that would just destroy my world. So when I first went on social media and someone would say something just even minorly bad, I was destroyed and thought, I got to get off social media. But then my kids were like, Mom, there's a strategic way to use these things. And I was like, okay. So I have come up with my own policy. It's different for different people. But there are platforms that are designed to engage, and I'm happy to engage in the comment section or, to other comments that people make that are talking about the topic. I've decided that anyone who engages in sexist or racist or homophobic comments, or people who comment on your appearance, like the size of your breasts or what kind of makeup you wear, and those people are block, delete, block, delete, block, delete. Now, sometimes I'll get the comment when they create a new profile that's user 1234 and says, how dare you? This is a free country. I have a right. How dare you block me? It's like, well, actually, social media it's my social media. So I get to choose who I'm friends with on Facebook. I get to choose who gets to comment. And that's for not just my personal well-being, but the people that are my followers, I'm actually more concerned about, because I've grown up to have some thick skin now, right? Because you just deal with that racism in society. It tends to make you thick-skinned. But the young people that are in my comments, or the people who haven't had a chance to build that armor yet, and nor should they have to, I don't want my followers to have to be exposed to a constant barrage of hate and vitriol and sexism and sexualized violence and racism and just horrible, horrible things that they say to people all the time. Because our people, I don't have to tell you, survivors of Indian residential schools, 60 Scoop, Indian hospitals, murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls, the foster care system, incarceration. So these people have experienced trauma on trauma on trauma on trauma. The last thing is I want to happen is for them to say, you know what, I want to learn about this piece of legislation Pam just did a video on, and I'm going to go watch it. And the first comment be, you people are all X, Y, and Z, or, terrible, terrible things to say. So I do it now more for my followers than anything else. And it's just been great. I don't mind if you support the Conservatives or the NDP or Liberals. Like, I am not invested in political parties. I want a debate. What I don't want are especially threats to people too, or threatening to dox people and show where people live. And, it's kind of one of the reasons why anyone who volunteers or helps me on the side as a volunteer, I don't put their names out there. I don't put their social media out there, nothing, because I never want them to get doxed or threatened or anything like that simply because they're supporting me. I don't want your listeners to get the wrong idea. 95% of the people on social media are activists and supporters and compassionate and allies and First Nations people and like wonderful, wonderful people, Canadians who just totally support us. There's always that yucky 5% of haters and white supremacists and everything else.
Oh, wow. Yeah. And you're doing, if you're doing big things, right? There's always going to be people are mad and upset and whatever else and just want to tear you down. So there's, and you spoke about all the traumas, add that one to the list too of people want to pull you down and crabs in the bucket and lateral violence and everything else you're dealing with, right? So, yeah, no, I get that. I live that a lot. Now working predominantly just Indigenous side too. So there's a lot of everything. But going back, can you explain really just quickly on doxed? And is that something is that real? Like,
yeah, so that's real. So doxing, for people who don't know, is when, so say user 1234 really hates that I support treaty rights. And they're like, you know what? Someone should bring you down. And so what they do is they start researching and they get their like user 456 and user 789 to all work together to look at my other social media to see if there's any identifying information. Is her address online? What about her office number? Is there somewhere where we can send all the haters and the trolls and some kind of not so healthy and violent people to your house and cause you problems, or to your work and cause your problems, or even if they don't go to your work, start nonstop spamming your employer. You should fire her. You should get rid of her. Look at what she's done. Blah, 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 blah. And so I just don't understand why we would do doxing at all. Like, I think that's just one of the darker parts of social media, that people would work so hard to try to find out where people are or who employs them so that they can get you fired, or things like that. It's awful. I really don't like how and of course women are disproportionately doxed, right? So you have to take security measures as well when those things happen. But yeah, really, the doxing part of the internet is pretty bad.
yeah, no, well, yeah, I thank for explaining that. And you explained it very well. When I do it, I try to stumble over things. But lately too, there's a lot of that, right? Like I've been just because of the space we're in now and people I get to talk to, really friends and with a lot of Indigenous influencers, right? And a lot of their social medias are just coming under attack to get locked out of or hacked or
Yep.
anything like that, right?
Yes.
From all over the place. And It's a tough one, that's for sure. I'm sure there's I got to do some research on that. I'm sure there's some indigenous agencies I'm sure that could support with that, or some online support.
Yeah, that
Um,
would be
yeah.
great. Because you think of the flip side, what they called internet sleuths, who go and try to solve unsolved murders. You know, like they're trying to do good in the world. They're putting all those research skills and everything else. I mean, not all of them, but most of them, to try to solve a crime or to try to locate a missing person. That kind of like sleuthing, investigatory work, I think that's a real contribution to society. It's unfortunate that there's this, really toxic group of people who will use those same skills to try to find people and hurt people. And the other thing is that every once in a while, it could come from our own communities. I would say the vast majority no, but sometimes there are people who are angry. Maybe they've suffered traumas. Maybe they have been mistreated and bullied their whole lives. And so they react with anger or jealousy or whatever. And if they can't knock you down, then they just start spreading lies and hoping that that gets people riled up. And if there's enough other people who just believe whatever they see on social media, then it becomes like a thing. So I don't know, 4 or 5 months ago, there was someone who was struggling mental health wise, who said, yeah, well, you know what, Pam Palmater, she's not even Native. She's not a member of any of our communities and blah, blah, blah. I was shocked at the way in which that kind of caught on, and people who know me and have worked with me started to say, yeah, I'm not going to work with you anymore. And I'm like, for what reason? It's like, well, you're not a member of your community, which really upset my chief, because my chief said, I dare those people to call me. Of course you're a band member. Your whole family's a part of this community. And yeah, so there's sometimes it comes, it's inside the house. And I try not to engage at all with any kind of negativity. But when it comes from inside the house, I don't know what that person has gone through. I don't like what they're doing, but I've always found by not engaging, I'm not adding fuel to the fire. If people have legit questions like, hey, Pam, this person's saying you're not a member of the community, are you? It's like, yeah, I'm a registered Indian too, if you care about that. But I try not to engage because someone might have just lost their child in a car accident. Someone might have just come out of prison and maybe they just haven't dealt with their stuff yet. Or maybe they're just angry and cranky. I just don't want to put energy into lateral violence, people call it, and try to just focus on as much as possible doing the education stuff. And just, for your listeners, when I say lateral violence, I'm not talking about people who disagree with me or people who are of various spectrums or people who debate. That's not violence. Or people who want to call out politicians and leaders and hold them accountable, not make accusations, but to say, hey, you need to be held accountable for this wrong thing you did. That's not lateral violence when we do that. When we hold our organizations to account, you need to advocate for us better. That's not lateral violence. Lateral violence is very deep. It's very personal. It's accusations, slander, attacks on someone that really has nothing to do with what it is that they're doing. It's not like holding someone personally accountable. So yeah, big difference. It's sometimes we all put it in the same category, but it's not the same thing.
No, certainly, right. And I just, that term is like the last 3 years in what I've been dealing with and working with in the line of work that we're in. And
Yeah.
yeah, it's pretty wild. I never knew it was like, I mean, I went to high school and reserve, like I know what it's like. I mean,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
get I get it, but going back even with the bullying stuff, right? Like it's very much from someone that's hurt. It always is, right? And
Yeah.
they take it out on a lot of, well, anyone that they can, and they can find someone not weaker, but if they can find someone to take it out on, they will, right? So I think that's a really important one that our youth, I teach my sons that a lot of, funny enough with warriors, right? I really am creating warriors. They're lucky. I'm very fortunate. I get to homeschool. So we homeschool our kids, right? So you get to teach them what we want, but they're very, very much like outdoors, lots of hunting, very, very,
Okay.
very proficient with bows, and but fighting as well, right? So with jujitsu and boxing and things, so they can really take care of
Nice.
themselves and be very much that person. But it comes from a place, so they have a lot of that, but then so much empathy on this. They'll punch you in the face and then give you a big hug to make sure you're okay about it. So it's quite the mix, but making sure that everyone remembers out there, right? That the bullies generally they're dealing with so much more, so much hate that inside
Yeah.
their own brain that or inside their own mind, that battle will be so hard. So I
It
think you
doesn't
nailed it.
justify bad actions. Like,
Yeah.
it's like, I can understand where they're coming from, so that's why I don't engage. It doesn't justify what they're doing, right? So I think, kids understanding that, oh, well, just because someone is traumatized, they get to do it to other people from now until the ends of the earth. Not good. But I like how what you're teaching them isn't just, hey, yeah, if a bully is pushing you around, like, sock them in the face. It's you're teaching them martial arts. Like, it's an art, it's a way of being. There's values and morals and things that are attached to all of those things, and what it's used for, what it's not used for. Like, I like the inherent teachings that are in it.
Oh,
So,
it's
yeah.
beautiful, and you get to do it in a non. Um, if you just do violence, if you just do, or it's not violence,
Yeah.
if you just do boxing, right, or
Yeah.
striking or kicking, you're punching someone in the face, and they're generally going to get a bloody nose or something, and then that's kind of it, and it looks really bad, right? But if you can do jujitsu and it feels worse. It's about 10 times worse. I'd rather get punched in the face than in jujitsu if someone like just goes on your back and gets you in a hold. They can choke you, but they're not letting you go to sleep, so you're kind of just there and you can't move. And there's probably no worse feeling, right? If you do that to a bully, they just crack, they break, and that's
Yeah.
100 times better than kicking someone or punching someone, because
Yeah.
you kind of help support. There's a little bit of healing in it almost for some, but
Yeah.
anyway, don't want to get too dark on that, but it's just to remember, right? Like these bullies, that in your advice of not engaging, which is beautiful, because it's
Yeah.
you just keep adding fuel to the fire, like you say. You dig a bigger hole and you're trying to like get out, but it
Yes.
just keeps going and going and making it worse and worse. So you're right, and you give them less attention, and eventually they'll just go away and they'll go on to the next thing, right? So
Yeah.
um and again, easier said than done, but um, with the podcasts, man, with everything, your documentaries, books. I know you talked about your website being a hub,
Yeah.
but you're also doing a studio, right? Like you have Warrior Life
Yeah.
Studio.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so
What's
exciting. So that's more on the newer side of things. So when I created this short documentary, I had originally done like a short, like kind of like a docu podcast episode for Imaginative. They are like a film and art and media festival, and they had asked me to do like a podcast about water. And you could do whatever you wanted. You could sing a song, you could play music, and of course, me. I inevitably dealt with the legal and political issues and how we need to support water protectors and things like that. So it did very well there. So I thought, you know what, maybe I should turn that into an actual short doc, like 20-minute short doc. Did that, entered it into some festivals, and it just like won a whole bunch of awards. So I thought, wow, maybe I should start getting into this on a more, like on a bigger level. So I incorporated Warrior Life Studios, and I am the president and CEO, and it's 100% Indigenous owned and operated and focused. Because I wanted to expand the ways in which we tell our stories, because storytelling obviously is so important for us, and it was like passed down to me. But sometimes when you get grants from like art agencies or governments or whatever, you have to flow it through a corporation. So before then, I just kind of did everything as me, sole proprietor or whatever. But yeah, so now I have this studio. So that within that studio, that's how I'm working on the cop podcast. I'm working on we're in the development stage or pre-development stage of a TV show about Indigenous stories, more documentaries. another documentary that's coming soon. So there's like lots of projects that, like I said, if I won $1 billion, or if there's a rich philanthropist listening and you've got like spare $1 to $5 million and you want me to have a hiatus, I would just do all of this creative work because it's all educational at the same time. You know what I mean? It's like not necessarily a Hollywood film. It's more you're going to learn the whole history and the law and what to do about it. There's always some kind of rallying cry. Okay, here's the problem, but here's what you need to do about it. This, and this. These are the free ways that you can help. Here are the ways that might cost money or time or energy or skills or something else. But yeah, so it's really just advocacy in a variety of forms.
Oh, that's great. With that studio, are you and I know you said you're like 100% obviously Indigenous owned and ran and direction. Is there room in there? I know it's probably early days, right? Like space for Indigenous to reach out and have some sort of what am I trying to say?
Like
Like
collaboration
collaborations and ways to volunteer, ways to help, ways to intern, that type of thing.
Always. So right now we're one of those, hey, I have a corporation, I have a studio, and it's in my, like I have a home office, like it's a bigger room, used to be like my TV room, where I have my cameras and my podcasting and all my like audio video equipment, things like that. So I primarily do it that way. But yes, collaborating with people. So say there's other Indigenous people who are working on a podcast and maybe they want some insight or direction, or they want to jointly work on a documentary. So that's what I'm doing now. This big documentary we're working on. It's a partnership with other Native people who are like, you know what? We kind of need a little bit more help. I love that part. And then you get to know all the other people that are in the industry, and then they help you. So early days, no money, but people who want to, help from time to time, that would be great. Or if people have skills or resources or connections or anything like that, that's also helpful too. What is difficult for me is that there's usually so many people who are so supportive and want to help that you get like a flood of emails from say 100 people who say, what can I do to help? Can I do this? Can I intern? Can I whatever? And I'm only one person. I'm still waiting to win the lottery so that I can hire an assistant. But these are things that develop over time, right? It's like early days. So eventually, maybe I'll be able to have paid internships, paid mentorship positions, because I'm in the process of applying for grants for things like that. Because it's no good if I just do this myself. My family brought me along and taught me everything that they knew. And I want to bring other people along so that I don't have to do this forever and I can sit back and chill out and watch all these young people doing what us old people are doing or we're doing.
That's exciting. Super exciting news. It's funny you say that. Yeah, I just want to put my sword down for a while and just relax, right? But no, that's amazing. That's good, and it's really inspirational that there's people like that out there, and there's people like you out there. Like I say, Indigenous, black, white, purple, doesn't matter, but you're out there doing it, right? And it's not perfect. I don't imagine. I know everything I do is sloppy, and I get it wrong most times. And
Oh my
luckily
gosh.
enough, I can barely tie my shoes, so people take that as like, okay, he just messed up. He'll be okay, and
Yes.
carry on. But that's probably the biggest thing that I try to get out there to people. Anyone I talk to, a lot of the youth, trades, working, doesn't matter, right? Like if you're not screwing up, you're not working. It's easy to not screw up, like don't do anything, right?
Yes. Just try. Do all of the things that scare you. So you can be scared or nervous or anxious about something, totally legit, and maybe you'll never be able to get rid of that fear. Like for me, my biggest fear was public speaking because I was so mortally shy. And you just do it anyway. And you'll make mistakes and you'll be embarrassed and people might say things to you, and they still do. People will be like, I watched your video and you coughed in it. Why didn't you edit that out? And I'm like, well, I am my own audio engineer and video editor, and so I'm going to make mistakes. And oh, good grief. some of my early YouTube videos just horrendously embarrassing, but I leave them up there on purpose so people can see, you know what? You just improve over time, but you don't unless you do it. And then you do it 1,000 times. And then by the end of it, you're going to have some skills and you're going to be pretty proud of yourself. But even today, if I was to go speak at, say, Flying Dust First Nation, I would just be so anxious and butterflies in my stomach and so nervous until I started speaking. And then I get really cranky about injustices or passionate about what we can do to fix them, that I forget that I'm nervous. And that happens over time. But the nerves never go away, ever. For me, anyway.
No, that's a great way to put that. And yeah, no, you nailed it. I don't think it ever goes away, right? You just have to get through it and carry on. And your message is a very important one. So, I mean, to get it out there and get out of your own way, because you got way more people to talk to and educate. I'll be mindful of your time here. I know you got to go. With everything you talked about, I mean, it can go on for days, but
yeah,
especially with the social side of things, and most people listening, everyone I talk to, the buzzword, reconciliation, social justice, all those type of things, right? But what's, especially with all your experience, like what's something today in like those little steps that people can take to actually start making that difference?
I always say, whether you're Indigenous or non-Indigenous, whether you're, supportive or not supportive, the very best thing anyone can do in this world is self-educate and learn more. We're going to be no good because of these social media algorithms that just kind of give us this echo chamber of like, oh, if you're a far right hater, well, those are going to be the people that talk to you, and then you'll think everyone else is. Look for what you can learn about. Do it over time. You're not going to be an expert, but to be a critical thinker, to have access to information, to be able to understand, okay, what's happening? Where can I fit in? How can I ask an educated question? It's no good to write to a whole bunch of Indigenous activists and say, hey, can you provide me some research on the history of treaties and what kinds of treaties are No, do that yourself. There's publications online. Imagine if we were doing that for everyone. That's what I mean by self-educate. There's tons of sources out there. And I would say for all the non-Indigenous people in particular, not that I'm going to get into a rant about pretendians, but be careful that what you're reading and what you're looking at and what you're searching for comes from authentic Indigenous peoples. It's pretty easy, I would say, to find them online. They're going to be like the Negon Sinclairs of the world, Tanya Talaga, Cindy Blackstock. Like, there's just so many of us. Like, any of the chiefs, any of the counselors, any of the band managers, any of the Native organizations, any of the Native podcasters, all the people who are boots on the ground. There's just so many people to learn from. And if I just had no idea, I'd be like, okay, I'm going to check out this Warrior podcast that Michael has. I'm going to make note of all of the guests that are on his podcast, but it's probably talking to real Native people. And then I'm going to go and try to read about what they're saying, what they're doing, what is their take on Native issues. But at first, it can be something as simple as follow Native people on social media, especially on Twitter. I know Twitter's very toxic, Twitter, Blue Sky, whatever, because you're going to get a lot of hot takes, people's perspectives, and you need to know there's no one Indigenous perspective on things either. So that's how, I would go about it. If I was moving to New Zealand and I wanted to know, hey, what are Maori people thinking about this stuff? That's how I would do it. I would follow the path of, like, you go to my podcast, Warrior Life. Everyone that's been on there that you see the episode is someone out there doing great things from a whole range of activities in the government, out of the government. Elected positions, traditional positions. You got men, women, people who support mining, people who don't. But primarily, I want people to just understand where everyone's coming from. because we're all trying to find our way to good for our people and the planet. We just might not agree on the best way to get there, and I think we'll develop that understanding and critical analysis and critical thinking if we have a variety of sources.
Oh, that's a great way to put that. Yeah, you nailed it. That's awesome. That's awesome. And you're right. There's you got to watch where you're getting your info from, but there's so many sources that you can and
Yeah.
people that are trusted that it's quite easy nowadays to do that.
Yeah.
Well, that's awesome. And I know we talked about it a little bit. I was going to say, like, what's the best place for people to find you and where they can find everything that Pam's doing. But
Yeah.
obviously the website, which I'll have tons of links for that.
PamPalmater.com, because it also links out to warriorlifestudios.com and all of like warriorlifepodcast.com, warriorkidspodcast.com, criminalsonpatrol.com, paranative.com. Like there's just so many things. It all kind of access it from the Pam Palmater website. You know what? I should just have an app. If any of you app people are out there, and you want to create an app, that would just be so much easier. You could just go, oh yeah, this is what she's doing now.
Hey, that's not a bad idea. If we can do that, get you some seed funding, we can carry this thing forward, right?
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, again, like I say, thank you for your time. I know you got lots of stuff to do, but I really appreciate it. This is so informative for a lot of people, and I know there's going to be a lot of people wanting to dig deeper into what Pam's doing, and so inspiring to a lot of the youth that you can make some changes, right? You're a single mom, you got your doctorate in law. I mean, these things don't just happen. So it's possible, right? It really is possible, and there's a lot of things working against you, but there's always a way out and a light at the end of that tunnel. So again, I really appreciate your time. Thanks so much for this, and we'll talk to you soon.
Well, thanks for having me. It's been an honor. Honestly, this hour went by in a flash. I could just talk to you for hours and hours. So we'll have to collab again in the future.
Awesome. Thanks again.
Thanks.